I can still hear the sound of their laughter, the way it bounced off the walls of my brother's cramped apartment, sharp and merciless, cutting deeper than any blade could. They were all laughing at him at first. Laughing because here was my older brother, the man who always had an answer, the one who swaggered through life like he owned it, now reduced to groveling over gambling debts. He stood there, red-faced and sweating, trying to laugh along with them but failing miserably. And then came the moment that would change everything, for him, for me, for us all. It started as a joke. At least, I think he meant it that way. "Why don't you take my sister?" he said, waving his hand toward me like I was some prize on a game show. I froze, my fingers tightening around the teacup I'd been holding. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, each beat screaming louder than the last. No one noticed, not really. To them, I was just another part of the scenery, invisible until someone decided to use me as a punchline. But then he stepped forward. He emerged from the shadows near the doorway, where he'd been standing quietly, almost forgotten. His appearance was jarring, not because he looked dangerous, but because he didn't belong. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, torn and stained. His hair unkempt, his face shadowed by days' worth of stubble. Yet there was something about him. Something that made the air in the room grow heavier, quieter. Even the laughter died down as everyone turned to look at him. "I'll take her," he said simply. His voice, rough yet controlled, like gravel smoothed by years of wear. Just 3 words, spoken so matter-of-factly, yet they landed like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples outward. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then my brother laughed again, louder this time, slapping his knee like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. But I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes, the split second before he realized the stranger wasn't joking. "Wait, you're serious?" my brother stammered, his bravado crumbling under the weight of those piercing gray eyes. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied me, his gaze sweeping over me slowly, deliberately, as if assessing whether I was worth the trouble. I wanted to shrink back, to disappear entirely. But pride, or maybe fear, kept me rooted to the spot. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. "Yes." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. Not like this. I opened my mouth to protest, to scream, to do anything. But no sound came out. Because deep down, I already knew that I didn't have a choice. If I refused, my family would suffer. My brother might lose everything. And so, despite every instinct telling me to run, I found myself nodding too. That night, after everyone left and the reality of what I'd agreed to settled over me like a suffocating blanket, I sat alone in my room, staring at the wall. My mind raced with questions, fears, doubts. Who was this man? Why had he agreed to such a ridiculous arrangement? And what kind of future awaited me now? Hours later, unable to sleep, I ventured downstairs, only to find him sitting in the darkened living room, staring out the window. His profile was illuminated faintly by the moonlight streaming through the glass, revealing lines etched deeply into his face, lines that spoke of pain, loss, secrets buried too long. When he finally spoke, his voice startled me. "You won't regret this," he said softly, without looking at me. "Not if you trust me." Trust him? How could I possibly trust someone I barely knew? Someone whose very presence filled me with unease? But even as suspicion clawed at my chest, I couldn't ignore the strange certainty in his tone, as if he believed every word he said. And perhaps that was the most terrifying thing of all. Before we begin, a quick note. This video is a work of fiction intended for mature audiences. It contains suggestive themes and passionate storytelling designed for entertainment purposes only. There is no explicit content, violence, or real events depicted here. Viewer discretion is advised. If you're ready for a thrilling romantic tale, sit back and enjoy. The days that followed were a blur of whispered conversations, hasty arrangements, and sleepless nights. My brother avoided my gaze whenever I tried to confront him, muttering excuses about how it's for the best, or, "You'll see, he's not as bad as he looks." But I didn't need his reassurances. What I needed was clarity. Answers. Some semblance of control over my own life. Instead, I got silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The wedding itself felt more like a business transaction than a celebration. There were no white dresses, no flowers, no joyous laughter echoing through a grand hall, just a small sterile room in the local courthouse, with peeling wallpaper and fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Even the judge seemed disinterested, flipping through papers with an air of detached efficiency. It was all so cold, so devoid of emotion. And then there was him, standing beside me, tall and stoic, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He hadn't changed much since that night at my brother's apartment. His clothes were cleaner now, pressed and tailored, but they couldn't disguise the hardness in his posture or the shadow behind his eyes. If anything, he looked even more intimidating here, in this quiet official setting. Every time I glanced at him, my stomach twisted into knots. Who was this man? What did he want from me? My family wasn't there. Not that I expected them to be. My brother had slunk away after making the arrangements, too ashamed to face what he'd done. And my parents? They would never understand. To them, I was simply fulfilling my duty, sacrificing myself for the greater good. Duty. Sacrifice. Words that sounded noble on paper but left me feeling hollow inside. When the judge asked if I took this man as my husband, my throat tightened. The words caught somewhere between my heart and my lips, refusing to come out. For a moment, I thought about saying no. About walking away and letting the world crumble around me. But then I remembered the weight of everything, the debt, the shame, the fragile threads holding my family together, and I forced myself to nod. I do, I whispered, the words barely audible even to my own ears. He repeated the vow without hesitation, his voice steady and firm. A ring was slipped onto my finger, a simple gold band, unadorned and impersonal. And just like that, it was done. We were married. Afterward, we stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and damp earth. People bustled past us on the sidewalk, oblivious to the strange, heavy energy between us. He didn't reach for my hand or offer any kind of comforting gesture. Instead, he stood silently, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something far beyond my comprehension. Where to now? I finally asked, breaking the silence. My voice trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade I'd been trying to maintain. Without looking at me, he gestured toward a sleek black car parked nearby. Home. The word sent a shiver down my spine. Home not mine anymore. Not really. Whatever awaited me now belonged to him. As I climbed into the passenger seat, clutching my purse tightly in my lap, I couldn't help but wonder, would this place ever feel like home to me? Or would it always be just another reminder of the life I'd lost? The drive was long and silent, the cityscape giving way to rolling hills and sprawling estates. When we finally arrived, the house, or rather, mansion, before us took my breath away. It was beautiful, yes, but also imposing, its towering windows reflecting the fading light like watchful eyes. As he led me inside, I felt smaller than ever, swallowed whole by the vastness of it all. "This is your room," he said eventually, opening a door to reveal a spacious bedroom decorated in soft creams and golds. It was elegant, almost regal, yet utterly impersonal, like everything else about him. Before I could respond, he turned to leave, pausing only briefly in the doorway. "Good night," he murmured, his tone unreadable. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the deafening silence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The silence in the house was oppressive, wrapping itself around me like a thick fog. I stood frozen in the center of the bedroom, staring at the closed door he had just walked through. His footsteps faded down the hallway, each one echoing faintly before dissolving into nothingness. And then there was only stillness, so profound it felt almost alive, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know what I had expected. Perhaps some kind of explanation. A word of reassurance. Even a fleeting glance that might hint at what he was thinking. But no. He had simply left me here. Alone. In this cavernous room filled with things I didn't recognize and couldn't claim as my own. It wasn't home. It was a gilded cage. Beautiful, but isolating. My eyes scanned the space again, taking in the intricate details, the plush rug beneath my feet, the ornate chandelier hanging from the ceiling, the massive four-poster bed draped in silk. Everything screamed wealth and luxury, yet none of it offered comfort. Instead, it reminded me of how out of place I was. How mismatched we were. Him, a man of power and mystery. Someone who clearly moved through life with purpose and control. Me, a woman thrust into a situation she hadn't chosen, unsure of her role or her future. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to steady myself. My mind raced with questions. Would he come back? Did he expect something from me tonight? Or was this how it would always be, two people sharing a roof but living separate lives? The uncertainty gnawed at me, worse than any answer could have. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time seemed to blur in this strange limbo. I changed into the plain nightgown I'd hastily packed, feeling ridiculous in its simplicity compared to the opulence surrounding me. Then I climbed under the covers, pulling them tightly around me as if they could shield me from the weight of everything I was feeling. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house, every distant sound outside kept me on edge. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps approaching, the soft pad of shoes against hardwood. But when I strained to listen, there was only silence again. I told myself it was foolish to hope he'd return. Foolish to care whether he did or not. After all, what did I mean to him? Nothing more than a debt repaid. A transaction completed. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I wanted him to show me otherwise. To prove that he saw me as more than just a pawn in his game. That he cared. Even a little. But he didn't come. Not tonight. Finally, exhaustion overtook me, dragging me into a restless sleep. In my dreams, I wandered through endless corridors, searching for something I couldn't name. Each door I opened led to emptiness, a void that mirrored the ache in my heart. And then, just as despair began to swallow me whole, I saw him, standing at the end of a long hallway, his silhouette framed by golden light. He wasn't looking at me, though. His gaze was fixed elsewhere, distant and unreachable. I called out to him, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. When I reached for him, he vanished, leaving me alone once more. I woke with a start, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the room in warm hues that mocked the coldness I still felt inside. For a moment, I wondered if last night had been a dream, if the events of the past few days had been nothing more than a terrible nightmare. But the ring on my finger, cool and unyielding, reminded me otherwise. This was real. All of it. As I rose from the bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror across the room. My reflection stared back at me, pale and haunted, eyes rimmed with dark circles. I looked like a stranger. A woman caught between worlds, unsure of which path to take, or if she even had a choice anymore. Taking a deep breath, I resolved to face whatever lay ahead with as much dignity as I could muster. Whatever this marriage was, whatever it became, I refused to let it break me. Little did I know, the cracks in his armor, and mine, were already beginning to form. The days that followed were a quiet routine of solitude and unease. I spent most of my time wandering the sprawling mansion, exploring its many rooms and corridors as if hoping to uncover some hidden truth, about him, or perhaps about myself. But no matter where I went, the house felt empty. Hollow. Not because it lacked furniture or decor, but because it lacked life. There was no laughter here. No warmth. No sense of belonging. Just echoes of footsteps and the faint hum of distant appliances. He kept to himself, disappearing into his study or elsewhere in the house for hours at a time. Occasionally, we'd cross paths in the hallways or during meals. But our interactions were brief and impersonal, a nod, a murmured good morning. Nothing more. It was as though he had erected an invisible wall between us, one I wasn't sure how to breach, even if I wanted to. But then, one evening, something changed. I had ventured outside after dinner, seeking solace in the cool night air. The estate's garden stretched out before me, vast and meticulously manicured, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Roses climbed trellises, their petals shimmering with dew, while tall hedges formed intricate mazes that seemed designed to confuse and enchant. I walked slowly, letting the scent of blooming flowers fill my lungs, trying to calm the restless energy that had been building inside me all day. As I rounded a corner near the fountain, I saw him. He stood beneath an ancient oak tree, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his trousers, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For once, he didn't seem cold or unapproachable. Instead, there was a vulnerability in his posture, a slight slouch, a heaviness in his shoulders, that made my heart ache in ways I couldn't explain. Before I could decide whether to approach or retreat, a sound broke the stillness. A soft whimper, almost imperceptible, coming from the shadows beneath the tree. My eyes darted toward the source, and I saw it. A small dog, trembling and thin, its fur matted with dirt. It looked up at him with wide, pleading eyes, too weak to run but desperate for help. Without hesitation, he knelt down beside the animal, his movements gentle and deliberate. He removed his jacket and wrapped it around the shivering creature, cradling it carefully in his arms. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. This was not the man I thought I knew, the stoic, distant stranger who had married me without a word of explanation. This was someone else entirely. Someone capable of tenderness. Of compassion. I must have made a noise, because he turned his head sharply, his eyes locking onto mine. For a split second, I thought he might snap at me, tell me to leave. But instead, he simply held my gaze, his expression unreadable, yet somehow softer than before. "It's been a long time since I've seen you out here," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "Do you often wander alone at night?" His question caught me off guard, not because of what he asked, but because he had chosen to speak to me at all. In the weeks since our marriage, he had rarely initiated conversation, let alone acknowledged my presence beyond basic courtesies. Now, standing there with the injured dog in his arms, he seemed almost human. "I needed air," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "The house feels suffocating sometimes." He nodded slowly, as if understanding exactly what I meant. Then, without another word, he rose to his feet and began walking back toward the house, the dog cradled protectively against his chest. I followed silently, unsure of what else to do. When we reached the kitchen, he set the dog down gently on a blanket and retrieved a bowl of water. As the poor creature lapped at the liquid greedily, he glanced at me again, his gray eyes tinged with something I hadn't seen before. Hesitation, maybe. Or regret. "You should get some rest," he said quietly. "I'll take care of this." And just like that, the moment passed. He returned to his usual reserve, tending to the dog with quiet efficiency, while I lingered awkwardly in the doorway. Yet even as I climbed the stairs to my room, I couldn't shake the image of him kneeling beneath the oak tree, his face illuminated by moonlight, his hands cradling something so fragile and broken. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. Whatever walls he had built around himself, they weren't impenetrable. Somewhere beneath the cold exterior was a man who cared deeply, even if he didn't know how to show it. And for the first time since our marriage began, I allowed myself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us after all. The days that followed felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Perhaps it was the memory of him kneeling under the oak tree, cradling that injured dog with such unexpected tenderness. Or maybe it was the subtle shift in his demeanor, small things, like the way he lingered a moment longer at the breakfast table or glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Whatever it was, the air between us seemed lighter. Less suffocating than before. But just as I began to entertain the faintest glimmer of hope, reality came crashing down. It started with a phone call. A woman's voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the quiet of the study where he spent most of his time. I had been passing by, carrying a book I'd borrowed from the library, when I heard her name. "Claire." His tone changed instantly, becoming clipped and formal, as if he were donning a mask I hadn't seen in days. Curiosity tugged at me, and I paused outside the door, clutching the book tightly against my chest. "I told you not to contact me here," he said, his voice low but laced with tension. "This isn't the time." Her response was muffled, but her tone was unmistakable, cool, calculated, and vaguely threatening. My stomach churned as fragments of their conversation reached me. "You owe me. Don't forget who made you. She doesn't need to know." When he emerged from the study moments later, his expression gave nothing away. But I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He didn't acknowledge me as he walked past, his footsteps quick and purposeful, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. Who was Claire? What did she mean by "oh"? And why had her words sent a ripple of fear through me? I tried to push it out of my mind, telling myself it wasn't my place to pry. After all, we were still practically strangers, bound together by circumstance rather than choice. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore it. That evening during dinner, the tension was palpable. He sat across from me, picking at his food without appetite, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. I wanted to ask. To demand an explanation. But something held me back, pride, perhaps. Or fear of what I might uncover. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, I spoke. Who was on the phone earlier? The question slipped out before I could stop it, soft, but steady. His fork clattered against his plate, and for a moment he froze. Then he looked up at me, his gaze piercing. "It's none of your concern," he said curtly, his tone colder than I'd heard it in days. The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they felt like a betrayal. For a brief moment, I had allowed myself to believe that he might let me in. That he might trust me enough to share whatever burden he carried. But now, sitting across from him in this grand dining room, I realized how naive I had been. Anger bubbled inside me, hot and unrelenting. "None of my concern?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You married me, remember? Whether either of us wanted it or not, we're tied together now. So forgive me if I think I deserve some honesty." He stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he pushed his chair back and stood. "You're right," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're tied together. But that doesn't mean you get to know everything about me." And with that, he turned and left the room, leaving me alone with the weight of his words and the growing distance between us. For the rest of the night, I avoided him, retreating to my bedroom and burying myself in the book I'd brought upstairs. But even as I flipped through the pages, my mind kept returning to Claire. To the secrets he refused to share. To the walls he had rebuilt in an instant. Was this what our life would always be like? A cycle of closeness and withdrawal? Of fleeting moments of connection followed by cold indifference? If so, I wasn't sure I could endure it. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something painful but undeniable. Trusting him wasn't just difficult. It might be impossible. And yet, deep down, a part of me still wanted to try. The days that followed were marked by a heavy, unspoken tension. We moved around each other like ghosts, careful not to collide, yet unable to fully retreat into our separate worlds. He avoided me as much as possible, disappearing into his study or leaving the house entirely. While I wandered the halls aimlessly, replaying our argument in my mind. Each word he'd said, and those he hadn't, felt like shards of glass lodged beneath my skin. Sharp and persistent. But then one morning, something unexpected happened. I woke to the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows, a gentle rhythm that seemed to mirror the quiet ache inside me. As I made my way downstairs, I found him sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee at the table. His usual suit was replaced by a simple sweater and slacks, and for the first time in days, he looked approachable, vulnerable, even. "Good morning," he said quietly, glancing up as I entered. His tone was hesitant, almost apologetic. I nodded stiffly, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to ignore him completely, to let the anger simmer until it burned itself out. But another part, the part that had seen him kneel under the oak tree, that had glimpsed the man behind the mask, urged me to stay. "I'm sorry about the other night," he continued after a long pause, setting his mug down carefully. "You were right. You deserve honesty." His words caught me off guard. For a moment, I simply stared at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But all I saw was exhaustion, deep, bone-weary exhaustion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Regret. Longing. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "There's so much I've kept hidden. So many things I thought I could leave behind. But you..." He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. "You make me want to try." The vulnerability in his voice undid me. All the anger, all the frustration I'd been holding on to began to soften, giving way to curiosity. To hope. "Then start small," I said finally, pulling out the chair across from him. "Tell me about Claire." He flinched at her name but didn't look away. "She's part of my past. Someone I trusted once. Someone who helped me when no one else would. But she's also the reason I ended up like this, alone, closed off." He gestured vaguely toward himself, as if encompassing the life he now led. "She reminds me of debts I can never repay. Mistakes I can't undo." "What kind of debts?" I asked, my voice gentle but firm. He sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "After my family lost everything, I did whatever it took to survive. Claire gave me opportunities, loans, connections, but always with strings attached. Strings I didn't realize until it was too late. And now she uses those strings to control me," he admitted, his jaw tightening. "She knows how far I've come, how hard I've worked to build a new life. And she won't hesitate to destroy it if it serves her purposes." The weight of his confession settled over us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to reach across the table, to take his hand and tell him it would be okay, but I knew it wasn't that simple. Some wounds ran too deep to heal overnight. "You don't have to face her alone," I said instead, choosing my words carefully. "Whatever happens, we're in this together. Whether you like it or not." For a moment, he just looked at me, his eyes searching mine as if trying to decipher a riddle. Then, slowly, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, a real smile, one I hadn't seen before. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the rain. "That means more than you know." As the hours passed, we talked. Not just about Claire, but about everything, his childhood, his struggles, the walls he'd built to protect himself from a world that had hurt him too many times. In return, I shared pieces of myself, my fears, my dreams, the loneliness I'd carried long before meeting him. It wasn't easy. There were moments of discomfort, of hesitation, of raw emotion spilling over when neither of us expected it. But with each word, each shared glance, the distance between us began to shrink. By the time evening fell, the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside glistening and fresh. We sat together on the couch in the living room, side by side, but closer than we'd ever been. For the first time since our marriage began, I felt a spark of connection. Not forced or fleeting, but genuine and warm. And as he reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine lightly, I realized something profound. Healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about finding someone willing to walk through it with you. Even if the road ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: we'd face it together. The days that followed our conversation felt like stepping into a new chapter. Not just of our lives, but of who we were becoming, together. The air between us had shifted. No longer heavy with secrets or guarded silence. Instead, there was a quiet ease. A rhythm that grew as naturally as the sunrise. We began to share moments that felt less like obligations and more like choices to laugh over breakfast, to linger in the garden after sunset, to simply be in each other's presence without needing words. But beneath the surface, I could sense something brewing within him, a restlessness, a determination I hadn't seen before. He spent hours on the phone, his voice low and resolute, often disappearing into his study for what felt like endless meetings. At first, I tried not to pry, telling myself it wasn't my place. But then one evening, he emerged from the study looking both exhausted and lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally lifted. "I need to show you something," he said, his tone uncharacteristically soft, yet urgent. Curiosity mingled with apprehension as I followed him outside. The night was cool, the stars scattered across the sky like fragments of light. He led me to the edge of the estate, where a car waited under the glow of a lamppost. Without explanation, he opened the door for me, his hand lingering briefly on mine as I stepped inside. We drove in silence, the hum of the engine blending with the rhythmic sound of tires against pavement. My mind raced with questions. Where were we going? What did he want to show me? Yet something about his demeanor kept me from asking. There was a gravity in his expression. A mixture of vulnerability and resolve that made me hold my breath. When we arrived, I realized we were at a small park overlooking the city. From this vantage point, the sprawling lights below looked almost magical, shimmering like constellations reflected in water. He guided me to a bench nestled beneath an ancient oak tree, its branches stretching toward the heavens like outstretched arms. For a long moment, he simply stood there, gazing out at the horizon. Then, turning to face me, he took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Something I should have said long ago." My heart quickened, anticipation tightening my chest. "When I agreed to marry you," he continued, "it wasn't because of your brother's debt. Not entirely. It was because when I saw you that night, standing there amidst all the chaos, I saw someone strong. Someone who deserved better than the life being forced upon her. And selfishly, I wanted to be the one to give you that." His words caught me off guard, stealing the air from my lungs. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, though I fought to keep them at bay. "But I failed," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I let my fears get in the way. I pushed you away because I didn't think I was good enough for you. Because I didn't think anyone could ever truly see past the walls I've built." He paused, reaching for my hands and holding them gently in his own. His touch was warm, grounding, a stark contrast to the coldness I'd once associated with him. "Lila," he said, his gaze unwavering, "I know I can't erase the mistakes I've made or the pain I've caused. But I want to try, to build something real with you, something honest and true. If you'll let me." Tears spilled down my cheeks now, no matter how hard I tried to stop them. This man, who had once seemed so distant, so untouchable, was laying himself bare before me, offering not just his love, but his trust. His heart. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Not again. Not ever." And then, without warning, he knelt before me, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, a delicate band adorned with a single diamond, simple yet breathtaking. "Will you stay with me?" he asked, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Not because you have to, but because you choose to." Time seemed to stand still as I stared at him, the man who had once been a stranger, now someone I couldn't imagine living without. My answer came easily, instinctively. "Yes," I breathed, my voice barely audible above the rush of emotions flooding through me. "Yes. I choose you." As he slid the ring onto my finger, I saw the relief wash over his face, followed by a joy so profound it lit up his entire being. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just a proposal. It was a promise. A promise to start anew, to heal together, to love without reservation. And in that moment, surrounded by the vastness of the night sky and the warmth of his embrace, I believed in us. Truly believed. Weeks later, we returned to the park where he had proposed. This time, bathed in the golden light of early evening, the world felt softer somehow, as if spring itself had decided to celebrate alongside us. Flowers bloomed in vibrant hues, their petals swaying gently in the breeze, while birds sang melodies that seemed almost too perfect to be real. He held my hand as we walked along the path, his fingers intertwined with mine. Every step felt like a testament to how far we'd come, from obligation to connection, from distance to intimacy, from brokenness to healing. We weren't the same people who had stumbled into this marriage. We had grown, together and apart, learning to trust, to forgive, to love. At the edge of the overlook, he stopped and turned to face me, his eyes reflecting the colors of the setting sun. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" he asked, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "How could I forget?" I replied, squeezing his hand. "It was the night you promised me honesty and gave me hope." His smile softened, growing tender, as he reached up to brush a strand of hair from my face. "That hope is everything to me now," he murmured. "You are everything." His words filled me with a warmth that spread from my chest to every corner of my soul. In that moment, I knew this was love, not the kind that comes easily or without effort, but the kind that is earned through shared struggles, quiet sacrifices, and countless moments of choosing each other again and again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, he pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me like a shelter from the world. "I love you, Leia," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. More than words can say. Tears blurred my vision, but they were happy ones, tears of gratitude, of fulfillment, of knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be. "I love you too," I whispered back, leaning into his embrace. "Forever." And as we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the fading light, I knew we had found our happily ever after, not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as two souls who had chosen each other, despite it all. Vim Darativa.